So we talked about a bit of emotions, but can you please remind me, because I read the articles, but for our audience, remind please about the types of emotions your Valence vibrations communicate?
Yes. So we started with what are called Paul Ekman's 6 basic emotions plus neutrals. There's the first 7 that are on this initial version of that we're going to be launching. Happy, sad, angry, disgust, surprise, fearful, and neutral. So those are the basic emotions that the app will first recognize. And then we're working to build in more nuanced vibrations so that you can understand things like intensity of emotion, as well as sort of different emotions beyond sort of the basic buckets. And that's something that we'll be working on in the next 6 months. To sort of
That's a really ambitious task, because emotions, by concept of emotion by itself is a very difficult thing, right? To basically to kind of categorize the emotion, what emotion means, depending on the context, right? And then for the system to recognize those emotions, it's a whole big world out there. So it's super ambitious. Really, I'm really impressed with your project. So if you're going further into basically what you're doing, you're mapping vibration to a specific emotion, right? So if you could give us a bit of more information about the design process behind this mapping. I understand maybe some of this information is confidential, but maybe you could share your kind of research insights in your like initial thought process with your team, maybe prior prototypes, maybe some theoretical underpinnings. Feel free to share any configurations, let's say, I don't know, frequency, amplitude, and how they map to a specific emotion. Anything you'd like to share would be great.
Of course. So when we were initially thinking about this with early prototypes, we were really trying to sort of capture the spirit of the emotion that the vibration is supposed to signify, because I think that that would be the most immediately obvious to someone that didn't go through a training process. Importantly, with most haptics, it does require sort of a training process. There is a learning curve because, especially with sensory substitution and augmentation, you are literally creating a new sensory experience to signify something that didn't previously signify that. For example, taps on your wrist in very specific spots didn't previously signify emotion for any of our testers, users. So that's something that they have to learn. However, in order to make that learning process a bit easier, making these vibrations feel angry, for example, would be helpful, is what we learned early on in pilot studies. So what we tried to do is model our haptics off of other affective haptics studies. In academia, people were playing around with frequency and intensity of vibrations associated with different emotions by sort of studying the feeling of someone squeezing your shoulder or touching your arm with certain intensity and frequency. And so we tried to model those initial studies in biological sensory systems between someone literally touching you and the person reporting how each touch felt into haptics. So we really wanted each vibration to feel like the emotion it represents. For angry in particular, it's a very short and high intensity vibration, which sort of evokes the feeling of angry. I would say that's probably the easiest one to automatically understand, at least on this Apple Watch product that's about to come out, because it's very immediate angry vibration. Neutral is a very light, low intensity, and sort of softer, spread out haptic feedback vibration. And some of the others are sort of like surprise feels sort of like a flutter, as if you're sort
That's what I wanted to ask you about, the surprise, because surprise, I believe, is one of the most difficult emotion to actually pinpoint and understand in terms of like designing it. So I'm really curious, how did you design the surprise actually?
And I think it's interesting because there's sort of 2 schools of thought. There are emotions that are more similar to each other than others. So emotions that have a similar emotional valence, whereas surprise is oftentimes as positive as happy, but it's not quite the same intensity necessarily. Whereas other emotions have different valence with the same intensity. So you might be like the same level of angry as you are happy, which is something that we sort of have to keep in mind when designing the haptics, because there is sort of the scale of valence and arousal that can translate into the dimensions of the haptics that you're creating. Importantly, the sort of haptic engine on the Apple Watch doesn't give this level of design specificity because it only has one motor that's sort of split into two. So you can probably feel it when you're, for example, using directions on the Apple Watch. You'll see there's like a left turn vibration and a right turn vibration. And so all of our haptics are made up of sort of patterns of possible vibrations on the Apple Watch without a lot of spatial resolution necessarily on the bands. So that's something to keep in mind depending on the form factor. But it's been really fun sort of playing around with how to evoke these feelings with the vibrations that we have.
Yeah.